Around the time of Brilliant Stars, a Urshifu deck started dominating the game, and this was developed by like Tord Reklev and Robin Schultz. It's the European contingent brought out this version of the Urshifu deck that started to dominate at the time, being able to hit Arceus and Mew for weakness. And to this day, I still can't play this deck. I'm familiar with how to play Shady Dealings. I love playing Urshifu with Melanie. I have used this Moltres card from time to time, but the way this deck worked was absolutely nuts, of like having to play certain cards at certain times. You're going to use the Hoopa to do a little bit of damage in the early game. You're going to use Urshifu and Inteleon where you can to get incremental damage, and then you're going to play the Moltres at the end to land that massive KO on a VMAX at the end of the game, and you're facilitating this with like a copy of Mew, and then like one of like each support. Each supporter and your Shady Dealings, and you're using nets to reset. Like it's crazy. To this day, even now, like a year and a half after this deck was in its prime, I don't think I could play this deck today. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the difficulty level of decks in the current standard format of the Pokemon trading card game. Now, I understand that difficulty is relative. If you are familiar with a particular play style, you're going to be more comfortable with that, and that might not align with how I rank these. But I did want to take an opportunity to take the meta decks right now and rank them based on difficulty. And I think that one of the reasons I do this, I saw on my YouTube comments someone asking of like, which of these pre-made decks should I play? And on one hand, like Lost Box, the Giratina one, is probably the strongest deck they give you out of the box, and it's really easy to tweak. But playing Lost Box is really hard, and it may not be the best for a beginner to try out. So what we've got here is a tier list of pretty much the top meta decks in the game right now. I also slipped in some league battle deck options because we talk about league battle decks all the time, and I wanted to rank them based on difficulty. And we're going to use S tier as like the hardest decks to play, and D tier as the easiest decks to play. I know there's two Miraidon Regieleki, and it's a bug in the Trainer Hill, but shout outs to Trainer Hill for having this tier list maker for us to use. All right, so in terms of difficulty, let's start out with Miraidon Regieleki, which is currently free on the Battle Pass on PTCG Live. In terms of difficulty, I think it's arguably the easiest deck here. Really get Miraidon on the board, and then boom, your whole bench is full. At which point, it's just a matter of managing your energy, getting the Regieleki set up, and a lot of the deck hinges on rolling the dice with electric generators and hoping you hit on a couple so that your attackers get going. But really, this is a really easy deck to set up. It can hit very hard, very fast. Again, I'm not talking about how good these decks are in this tier list. This is just like difficulty. And this deck might have a lower ceiling than some of the other ones here, but I think of the decks on this list, it is the easiest one to play. Next up, let's talk about another meta deck here, Lugia Archeops. I'm surprised to a certain extent. I'm surprised that we don't see this deck on live as much, because I think it's very strong and you can tech it out with a whole bunch of different attackers, and it's going to get better in Paldea Evolved. But in terms of like how difficult it is to play, I actually think it's down here. It's one of the easier decks to play, and it really comes down to the first two turns. Can you get Arceus, or can you get Archeops, two of them, in the discard pile before you end turn 2? And if you can't, what do you do then? If you can get one, you can kind of fudge your way around it. If you get none, you're screwed. And to a certain extent, if you just draw a bad hand, there's nothing you can do about it, but you can say the same thing about all of these decks. But like the core challenge is, can you get the Archeops in the discard pile, and is the attacker that you want first already in the active? If it's not, like, do you retreat it? Do you just attack with it anyway? Those are kind of the decisions you're making with it. But like, Lugia is set up with a ridiculous set of attackers. You can tech it out a whole bunch of different ways. Tyranitar, Stonjourner, Drapion, the Yveltal, the single strike one. We're going to get a colorless version of the deck coming in Paldea Evolved. And I think it is like one of the top tier decks that is actually also one of the easiest to play. So if you're looking for a strong and easy deck to play, I think Lugia Archeops is an amazing choice. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum, and let's go start with Gardevoir, where Gardevoir is a tough deck. It hinges on setting up a stage 2 Pokemon. You kind of have to fall behind on prizes based on the way that it is built. And you're kind of also relying on, like, hopefully you get the right setup and you can mulch through your cards in the right way, and hopefully you don't mulch through anything that you need down the road. At this point in time, I think it is on the top tier difficulty. It is also an incredibly strong deck that is winning left and right, and it is incredibly powerful, and it does things that other decks can't. But yeah, it's a really tough deck to play. I actually don't think it's the toughest deck to play on this list, but I think it is deserving of the highest tier here. Let's go look at another one. Let's go Arceus. Now, Arceus, I'm using like Arceus plus whatever. Arceus Duraludon, Arceus Pikachu, Arceus Giratina, even just vanilla Arceus straight up. I'm going to use Arceus for that. And of where these would rank regardless of which version you're playing, I think it's in the easy tier. It almost hinges entirely on, can you get an Arceus and an energy on turn 1? And can you get an out to Arceus V-Star on turn 2? After that, everything is kind of easy. You might still get bodied by something that can knock out Arceus, especially if you're going second. But the actual like decisions you have to make are, regardless of which variation you have, aren't that, there's not that many. Get Arceus set up, attack with Arceus till it dies, and then whatever your partner is, whether it's Regidrago or Duraludon or Vulpix, you just kind of swing with those till the end of the game. And then you throw in some paths and some judges here and there to disrupt their hand as well. But like another very strong deck with a lot of different ways of teching it out that's not that hard to play. Let's go grab a League Battle deck candidate here. Also, like, just one of the top decks in the game, Mew VMAX. I think that on one hand, it is a deck with an incredibly low floor. Like, if you know that you have to grab Genesect and just like draw a whole bunch of cards, you can kind of get away with that for a while. You just draw a whole bunch of cards until you get what you think looks good, and you pop off from there. However, it also has a really high ceiling, because as you're drawing cards, you're also constantly thinning your deck or thinning your hand to then draw more cards, and you're constantly trying to micromanage, what do I keep? What do I get rid of? How far do I dig into my deck to grab pieces that I either need now or I need towards the end of the game? So I think that Mew has a very low floor. It has a very high ceiling, and I think that Mew's going to sit like in the middle. And I think you could make a case for it being technically anywhere on this list, but I'm going to say in the middle because it's a low floor deck with a very high ceiling, so we'll just put it in the middle. How about, let's talk about Lost Zone Box. This is like, and I'm going to use this. I know there's a billion versions of this. There's Turbo Lost Box, Sky Seal Stone Lost Box. There is like Kyogre Lost Box, all that stuff. I think that the Lost Zone engine in and of itself is one of the toughest engines to play, because first you got to get like the right setup. in your hand. If you don't have the comp phase or outs to comp phase, like, you're screwed. If you you also need your cards kind of in a specific order in the deck, because you can just draw and have to get rid of a whole bunch of good cards in order to get in the game, and that can be really tough, managing like what cards do you keep, which cards do you lost zone. And then on top of that, a lot of these lost box decks, the single prize ones, the Sky Seal Stone ones, you're oftentimes using squishy attackers and doing incremental damage in hopes that you can make it up later in the game with a Sableye, with a Kyogre, whatever that might be. And because of that, I think that it is currently the hardest deck to play in the game. And you might disagree with me, you might agree with me, but it is definitely challenging within having to manage your cards in the lost zone and having to constantly move your Pokemon around, and how do you power things up, and how do you do all the math to spread it out so that you get 6 prizes at the end of the game is really challenging with Lost Zone Box, which is why I put it in the hardest tier. All right, while we're at it, I think that we can also talk about let's do a different one. Let's go Shadow Rider Calyrex. Right, Shadow Rider Calyrex. This is a league battle deck candidate here. It's not really meta right now. It did have some flashes in Japan early on. Hasn't really made a splash in competitive play internationally. Scarlet Violet. That being said, Shadow Rider Calyrex is a deck you can get for really cheap. It is a deck that is a ton of fun to play, and you can tech it out in all sorts of different ways. You want to play it with Gardevoir, Mewtwo V-Star, the Kirlia engine, Deoxys V-Star and VMAX, lots of different ways to play this deck. And I think that of the difficulty here, it's probably like, I think it's also on the, I'm going to put it, is it easier than Arceus? It might be a little bit harder in the set, but only because Shadow Rider Calyrex is generally a harder deck to set up. Like you need more pieces. You need multiple Shadow Riders down. You possibly need the Cresselia or the Zacian or the Radiant Eternatus, however you're playing the game. But it's not that hard to get past that initial setup. And once you do that, then it's just like attach, draw, and whack really hard. So it's kind of the setup thing, but it's not that hard to play. Liltone, yes, S is most difficult. Okay, couple more decks here. Giratina and Goodra. I'm gonna do these ones together because I think they are both, here's Lost Zone, but you also have this very big attacker that can just hit a VMAX or a V-Star really hard. I know that they're technically different Pokemon that have strengths and weaknesses, but the core concept is the same, is that instead of having to do all of the math with single prize attackers or small, you have this big thing that's either gonna hit really hard or tank multiple hits. And while the Lost Zone engine is largely the same, it's still like tough to play because you have the big Pokemon that's either very defensive or very offensive that can just kind of carry you against some of the bigger Pokemon. I don't think it's as hard to play as like a single prize lost box. So Goodra, V-Star, and Giratina are going in the A tier of like, it's pretty hard, but not the hardest of the current meta. And I realized like no one's going to care about Palkia Ice Rider. Where does this fit on this tier list? I think that there are some cool plays you can make. Whether you are like attacking with Palkia and you get set up really quickly and you can hit really hard, whether you hit with Ice Rider and you can tank hits and take out 2 Vs at the same, like before you get knocked down, or 2 EXs before you get knocked down. You've got the Star Portal plays that you can set up with Greninja, or just reloading Ice Rider again, or just loading Palkia. The engine is definitely like, in the old days of Shady Dealings, this would be an A to an S tier deck because of all the cool combos you could do. But because the draw engine has been simplified a lot, with largely just Bibarel, and you might even be playing with like Kirlias instead, I think this goes down to like B. And I don't think it's as difficult to play as a Mew Genesect. So yeah, it is a middle of the road deck, very strong. It has some options, and you are kind of figuring out what attacker is best at during different stages of the game, but definitely not one of the harder decks to play. And I think the only thing I'm thinking about now that I look at this list, is it worth bumping one of these two out just so it looks even? Just so it looks even. I think if I had to, I would maybe bump Shadow Rider up one, where at least like in the times where you're not getting the one-hit KO, what do you do? But that's also like Shadow Rider just not being as good as Arceus. So how about we break it down like that? So that is my tier list. Again, this is not factoring in how good these decks are. It is just how easy or difficult are they to play. And I think the easiest decks in the meta right now, Miraidon, Arceus, followed by Lugia in the C tier, and League Battle deck option here, Shadow Riders, like a C tier deck. B tier, Mew Genesect. Again, this could go high or low. Calyrex Palkia has some really cool options, but again, it's not as crazy complicated as like a Gudra or a Giratina, and definitely not as complicated as Lost Zone Box or Gardevoir. All right, let me know. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. I see the chat is blowing up here, and I will chat with the homies after this, but let me know in the comments of this video, what do you think? Did I rank them fairly? Do you think certain decks are easier to play than I've ranked them, or harder? Let me know how you'd rank these decks. All right, I got to get going. Thank you so much for watching. Before we go, some quick plugs. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at In Third Person. You can find me on Twitch at In Third Person, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Except if you're watching, I don't know when this video is coming out, but the Mother's Day, the stream that would have been on Mother's Day, not happening because it's my wife's first Mother's Day. So sorry for that. I shouldn't apologize for wanting to spend Mother's Day with my wife, but there we go. And last but not least, check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until next time, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.